Greetings, exiles, and welcome to Kingsmarch. It's a lot livelier in here than the last time you joined me. I wanted to throw this together to explain to you some of the basics of the town, as well as just give you a little bit of insight into some things that you might not have realized your first time through. Before we get to that, let me give you a primer on gold. Gold is a new currency introduced in 3.25 and is used for pretty much everything. It's held in a special spot in your inventory, so no need to worry about taking up extra space. It's also picked up automatically when you walk over it. There's no way to automate gold acquisition, and aside from some late game town upgrades, the only way to get more gold is to go slay some monsters. Which means if you want to use systems like the black market or Faustus's currency exchange, you'll have to go play the game. In addition, gold is the lifeblood of Kingsmarch. You can't build new buildings, hire new workers, or pay the upkeep on existing workers without having a steady supply of gold. With that out of the way, let me tell you about the town itself. Let's begin with the town map. Accessible within Kingsmarch by clicking this button here. This will give you an overview of your town's resources, as well as allow you to assign workers to different stations quickly without having to physically traverse the town. On top of that, you can see how much gold your town's treasury has, and how long your treasury will last before it runs out of wages to pay your workers. To move gold from your inventory to the treasury, all you need to do is click this button here. As early as Act 1, you can invite Johann, the King's Hand, to your hideout, and he will allow you to access the same menu from there. If you'd like to head to the town without having to go through a waypoint first, you can type /Kingsmarch, and that will load you into the town. You can also macro the chat command with something like Awaken PoE Trade in order to enter Kingsmarch with one button press. Let's head into the Tavern. This is the first and most important building in your city. The first few upgrades here will unlock the basic systems in town, such as mining, shipping, and farming. Past that point, upgrades will give you extra town population limit, allowing you to hold more workers at once, as well as giving you access to higher rank workers overall. Speaking to Rolf will show you this menu where you can hire workers, or re-roll them if you don't like what you see. You can also dismiss workers if you decide that you don't need them anymore. Do be careful not to upgrade the tavern too quickly, as the reroll cost for new recruits goes up, as well as the wage for the workers goes up, as more skilled workers demand to be paid more. You should also note that all workers are not made equal. Some of them are willing to do the same job for less. Despite how dystopian this may sound, if you come across somebody who's willing to do the same job for less money, it can be a good idea to replace your current worker. It's especially important to keep an eye out for efficient shippers and mappers, and maybe keep a few in reserve, as these two job roles can be very dangerous and can actually kill your workers. Now that you know how to hire some workers, let's move over to the mining station. This is the first profession building that you'll gain access to, and it allows you to assign miners that you've hired to go and gather the ore that you've successfully marked out in the world. Each deposit, like this one that you find in maps, is associated with a different type of ore and provides a unique challenge, the difficulty of which generally scales up as you move down the list of resources. Once you've completed the encounter, the ore will be marked, and your miners can begin moving it to the town. If you're still early on and there is a resource that you haven't upgraded your mine to be able to gather yet, you can head to the mining information board to see that any ore that you've marked out in the world is still recorded. It just can't be mined until you have a miner capable of doing so. Even though you'll want to at least establish all of your profession stations so that you can get Kingsmarch up and running, I would recommend maxing out mining first, and that's because of this line here. Marking ore in areas grants gold equal to the amount of ore. This max rank upgrade can easily pay for itself in about 50 maps. Next, let's head over to Danig and the Smeltery. This is where the ore that you mark and mine can be turned into bars. One ore smelts into one bar, but each bar is worth much more when setting up a shipment to be sent overseas, and this is important for a reason that I'll go into later. Suffice it to say for now, that it's a good idea to get all of your ores smelted into bars before thinking about sending it anywhere outside of your town. We're also able to grow a lot of our own crops. Since the farms are pretty self-explanatory, I'll use this opportunity to talk about something I alluded to earlier, which is worker efficiency versus raw output. I'll explain what I mean using the ore gourds, because it's fun to say. Depending on the wage rolls, your workers might actually be less efficient as they become higher level. I'll rate their efficiency as a measure of what they produce per hour over what they're paid. In this case, I have a level 1 farmer producing 12 ore gourds per hour, and they demand 19 gold per hour to continue working. The worker produces 63% of what they're paid in crops per hour. My level 7 worker in the same plot will produce 169 ore gourds an hour, and is paid 376 gold per hour, with an efficiency of 44%. One place that this is especially pertinent and can save you some gold is in the bottleneck between mining and smelting. One level 4 miner is able to produce 312 crimson ore per hour, whereas one level 4 smelter is able to produce 138 bars per hour. Since there are far fewer spots available in the smelter than in the mine, even at a similar level, it can be a good idea to fill all these 12 slots with more lower level workers, as they actually work more efficiently and ask for less gold in relation to what they're actually able to do per hour, especially since you have a little bit of wiggle room in how much iron you're producing, because your smelter probably won't be able to keep up early anyway. This principle can be applied to the other profession stations as well, but I felt like the bottleneck here was the best way to demonstrate that sometimes it's a good idea to prioritize efficiency over raw output. Now we've been gathering ore and turning it into bars, and growing crops, and some of these are useful for upgrading buildings in the town, but past that point, we're going to need something to do with the excess, and that's where shipping comes in. Now on the left hand side, you can see which ships you have available to send out, as well as a place for you to prepare your crew. The higher level the crew, the lower level the risk you're going to associate with your voyage when sending higher value shipments. This button here will allow you to begin preparing your shipment, as well as showing you how much your shipment is valued at, which is a rough estimate of how much you'll receive in return. You can also see on the right hand side here how much of each of these resources you have at a glance without having to go back into your town view. You can use the sliders to adjust your shipment value, or you can type the number here for a little bit more precision. This button will allow you to select a port that you intend to send your shipment to. So far, I've unlocked 5 shipment locations, but you begin with only Ribbon Fell, a Kalguran outpost, or Nakanu, a Karui settlement. Upon mousing over a settlement, you'll see that they have some favored resources listed. These are resources that they're willing to pay a premium for, up to the cap. For example, they will pay 60% extra for the first 16,000 crimson iron ore that we send to Ribbon Fell. Now's a good time to point out something that I and I believe many other players missed, which is quite an important thing when sending bars and ores out to these settlements. You remember earlier that I said it was very important for you to send only bars out of your settlement rather than ore, and that's because of this line here. Bars count 5 times for port quotas. That's in reference to the favored resources listed here. What that means is if you were to send purely ore to fulfill all of these trade resources, you would have to send 16,000 iron, 9,200 orichalcum, and 2,300 verisium. Whereas if you were going to send bars, you would only have to send 3,200 iron, 1,840 orichalcum, and 460 verisium. And just to remind you, 1 ore smelts into 1 bar. That means you'd have to mine 5 times as much ore to fulfill these port quotas by sending only ore, rather than bars. There is one small exception to this rule, however. As I mentioned earlier, there is a pretty big bottleneck between mining and smelting, and that's important to keep in mind if you're outpacing your smelting by playing the game a lot and mining a lot of ore nodes. If they're asking for more bars than you can possibly send, then it can be okay to supplement it with a little bit of ore. For example, in this case, I don't have enough crimson iron bars, even with them multiplying their value by 5 for port quotas, to meet the crimson iron requirement for this favored resources trade. If I send all of my crimson iron bars, and some of my ore, however, I can fulfill the trade. And since it takes roughly the same amount of time for a shipment to go to the same settlement and back, if you do have to squeeze in a little bit of ore, just to meet the favored resources trade, it can be a good idea to complete the entire trade in one trip instead of having to send a completely different ship, especially because you'll be paying your workers the same wage for both voyages, even though they'll be carrying less the second time. And this leads me into what people are referring to as port favor. Upon completing port quotas, settlements will begin to offer bigger and bigger favored resource trades. This is important because as the quality of your workers increases, the amount of resources you can realistically send without incurring risk increases as well. But because it's inefficient to send more to a port than they are asking for in a single favored resources trade, you'll want to make sure that the settlements you're trading with can actually keep up with the amount of resources that you're able to safely send. Now, I initially thought it was the case that fulfilling a favored resource trade at a port over and over again would raise the level of that specific port, but it seems like that's not the case. There is some kind of global underlying level to all of the ports, which increases each time you fulfill a favored resource trait anywhere. The reason why this wasn't immediately apparent is because the favored resources trait only resets once you've fulfilled one at a particular port. But if that one hasn't been touched in a while and is still pretty low, fulfilling their port quota could bring them back up to the global level again. I've seen many people sending over 1 million shipment value to a port that they aren't favored with yet and getting garbage in return. Don't do that. Each one of these different types of resource returns a different reward. There are some exceptions to this, but from my own testing, Crimson Iron returns rare armor, Orichalcum returns rare weapons, Petrified Amber returns rare jewelry, Bismuth will either return quality gems or rare jewels, and Verisium can return scarabs or stacked decks. Per testing that others have done, depending on where you send the Verisium, it can also return catalysts, uniques, rogue markers, and fossils. It seems to be the most versatile of the metals, and can get you a lot depending on where you're shipping it to. Every single time I've sent any one of the 5 crops anywhere, it's only returned currency, and I haven't been able to discern that there's any meaningful difference between the crops. It seems like that's just the way that you get any currency. Per Reddit user WWGS, who has a very detailed post that I will link in the description down below, each port also returns a different affinity of armor and weapons, with Ribbonfell having random, Nakano being strength, Pondium being int, Te Anui being dex, and Kalgur being ward. One more thing which seems to be shipment independent is that if you send a shipment to a Karui settlement, you'll get some tattoos in return, and if you send a shipment to a Kalguran settlement, you will receive some runes in return, which can be used at the new runesmithing station next to the smelter in order to imbue your weapons with additional powerful effects. You'll need to upgrade the runesmith upon first finding a rune in order to be able to craft the enchantments that use that rune. All of these improvements are enchantments, meaning that they're not mutually exclusive with existing weapon implicits. Going back to shipping resources, let me tell you about Thaumaturgic Dust. It doesn't have a shipment value, so you can't send it on its own, but what it does do is multiply the value of your existing shipment. Even a very small amount of dust will multiply your shipment value by quite a bit. It does have diminishing returns, however. 100 dust will multiply your shipment value by just over 2 times, 1000 dust will multiply it by about 2.5, and 10,000 dust will multiply it by about 3. To emphasize the point that each of these shipments will take a static amount of time to leave and return from a settlement, it's good to make sure that your shipment value is as high as it can be for a single shipment. But you also don't want to run yourself out of resources, and a single port will only pay so much for so many different things. So while it's inefficient to just send more of a thing that they don't necessarily want, sprinkling even a little bit of dust on top of the shipment can easily double or even triple the value. I'll go over how to acquire this dust, as well as some of its other uses in just a little bit. Now that we have a shipment set up that will fulfill all of the port quotas of Ribbonfell, we can set sail. Now there is a 26% chance that the shipment will encounter unforeseen outcomes during its voyage. This can include things like weather, doubling the time that it takes for your ship to return, or the King of Kalgur catching wind of how valuable a shipment you're sending out and deciding to confiscate a large chunk of it on its way to the port, which will not only deprive you of some of the rewards that you would have received, but will also stop the port quota from being filled, as that port never received most of what it requested. This can be mitigated by hiring better crew, or upgrading your harbor so that you have more crew slots. What this risk bar does not influence, however, are things that cause you to lose crew in any way. This can include sailors falling overboard, or deciding to stay at another settlement to start a new life. Additionally, there is a random chance that a pirate lord will commandeer your vessel, holding both your crew and shipment hostage until you decide to either rescue them, pay the ransom, or abandon them to be executed. Unfortunately, I was unable to capture any footage of this, as the one time that it happened to me, I attempted to enter to rescue my workers, and the portal immediately closed in front of me, saying the instance could not be activated. I will say that so far this is the only part of the town that really feels like it's lacking in consideration. When hovering over the ransom button, it doesn't actually tell you how much gold you need in order to pay the ransom. I can tell you from personal experience that it's at least 30,000, but I've had reports that it is upwards of 50,000 in order to get your shipment back. And unless you care a lot about the shipment that you just sent, it can actually just be cheaper to let your workers die and hire new ones. At least the pirates were kind enough to return my ship to me. But maybe that's just because they know I'm dumb enough to continue sending out shipments for them to steal. When receiving large shipments of rares that you don't care about, you can bring them just next door to Rog's Disenchanting shop. Higher rarity items disenchant into more dust. You'll have to unlock the ability to disenchant rare and unique items, but you unlock disenchanting rare items pretty early, and at that stage, it seems like the higher value the mod on the item, the more dust it disenchants into. It seems to take about the same amount of time per item, so you really want to concentrate these items with the best mods that you can, which gets pretty easy once you've fulfilled some of the favored trades from these settlements, as they will begin sending you items with multiple tier 1 mods that disenchant for quite a bit of dust at a time. Now, the dust isn't just used for sprinkling on top of some shipments to multiply their trade value. It's also required for establishing and using the Recombinator. If you've never seen a Recombinator before, the general idea is that you'll add 2 items with some somewhat useful mods, but they aren't quite good enough to be used on their own, into either side, and it will put all of those things together into a pool, base types, implicits, explicits, even corrupted implicits. The resulting item will be a combination of those modifiers, hopefully in the way that you intended. In this case, I have a pair of rare antique greaves with really good chaos resistance and unveiled movement speed, but no life roll. Seeing as how naturally dropped life rolls are now much better than you can benchcraft onto an item, it wasn't really feasible for me to upgrade my current boots by just benchcrafting that armor into life. Instead, what I did was I grabbed a precursor greaves, which is one of the new armor base types, and I crafted it blue until it hit life. And as you can see, the result is quite potent, keeping not only the life roll, movement speed, and chaos resistance, but also moving all of my preferred mods over to the better boot base. Now, these boots aren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but either one of these items I would have just left in my stash or on the ground otherwise. It can take some getting used to, but it might be a good idea to leave your filter a little bit looser than you would normally leave it, just to make sure that you're picking up bases with some useful mods, because you might be able to slam them together with something else to make an actually usable rare, especially early on. It is also worth mentioning that while you can slam together any 2 rare items of your choice, it can be a good idea to wait until your Recombinator is maxed out if you're going for particularly rare mods, as those have a higher chance to be retained at maximum Recombinator rank. The final profession station that you can unlock is mapping. Isla has some ideas on how to create her own map devices so that you can send workers through to run maps for you. The further your map runners get within the map, the more rewards they will bring you. You'll still get some rewards even if they only partially complete the map, but if they're successful in running the entire thing, your rewards will be much greater. Low-level map runners have quite a high chance to die even in unrolled white maps. And even though they might not be able to bring you back a lot from just low-level maps, it is still passive income and can be a good way to get rid of some of your maps that you weren't going to run anyway. Keep in mind that map running is the most expensive profession to stock with workers. As such, they will have the highest wages, but they will also have the highest cost to rehire. So make sure that the maps that you're giving them aren't so difficult that you'll have to be constantly replacing them. Well, that's all I've got for you. And if you made it to this point in the video, thank you so very much for watching. I hope it was helpful to you. If it was, please leave a like, comment down below telling me what you thought, and consider subscribing or joining the channel to show your support. And if you happen to be aware of any generous benefactors with piles of gold large enough to, say, run a city, you can send them my way over at ds_GZ on Twitch. I'm live there most days, and right now I'm progressing through my Bleed Slam Gladiator. It's a blast, as well as panhandling for gold to try to stop my workers from rioting. Anyway, as always, I'm GZ, and I'll see you in the next one.